What's going on, everybody? It's your boy Kilo Loco, and today we're going to be making a blog using Swift. And the way that we're going to be doing that is we're going to be using John Sundell's publish repo. So let's get into it. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to go over to the publish repo made by John Sundell. And as you can see, there's all the information about it. He documented it really well. And if you scroll to the bottom, there's going to be an installation step. And this is actually going to tell you how to install publish onto your machine, because what you need to do is you need to install the actual CLI, which is the command line interface, what we're going to be using in the terminal. And then from there, you'll be able to create your project. So let's go ahead and head into our terminal and start downloading this thing. First, what we need to do is we need to copy this line right here, git clone, and the repo location. Let's go over to our command line, and I'll just do this inside of the desktop. So let's change directory. Now go ahead and paste in that line, and we have successfully cloned the publish repo. So if we do ls, we should be able to see it. And there it is right here. So now that we actually have the publish repo cloned down in our desktop, what we can do is we can change directories, and what we need to do is we need to run make. So what make will do is it's going to look at the make file that has been included in the published repo, and it's going to run whatever command. In this case, it's going to do this swift build-c release command. All right, so now that we actually installed publish onto our machine, let's go ahead and create a new directory or a new folder, which our project's actually going to be stored in. So I'm going to do Command K to clear my terminal. And I'm going to do CD back to desktop, so I could just do ... Now what we can do is we can create a folder of whatever we want our website to be named. In this case, I'm going to call mine Swift blog website. All right, so we did the mkdir, the make directory command, and we should have this Swift blog website on our desktop now. Let's go ahead and do ls, and we can see it right there. So let's go ahead and change directory into that Swift blog website folder. And all we need to do now is do publish new. After doing publish new, it should generate a couple of files, one of which will be the package.swift, and it says to run this command right here, open package.swift. So once we do that, it should open up Xcode for you. And if you go over to your Xcode, you should actually see that it's going through and installing all the dependencies. It may take a while for you on the first try, but after that, everything should be much faster moving forward. Now that we're done with that, all we need to do is we need to change the schema to point to our Mac. So make sure that this says my Mac, and go ahead and run it and make sure everything is working as expected. All right, so as we can see, it looks like everything has gone through successfully. And what we should be able to do now is go back over to our terminal and run publish run. This is going to put the project together in a fully workable website and host it on our local host port 8000. This way we should be able to see exactly what the website looks like. All right, and as you can see, it says starting web server at http://localhost 8000. So let's go ahead and command click on that, and that should open up our website. And as you can see, this is pretty much the hello world of publish. It gives us a really nice looking website, and it's actually already in our dark theme because my personal preference for my computer is dark theme, but if I were to open up settings and go to light theme, it would actually update, which is really cool. So as you can see, it's fully dynamic, and that's pretty much hello world with publish. Let's keep going and create our blog site. All right, first things first, got to switch back to dark mode. I cannot stand light mode. It's just, I'm kind of blind right now. All right, let's head back over to the project. So let's break down the project real quick. The first folder that you'll see right here is content, and this is going to be all the data that you actually want to populate your website with. This is going to be your blog post and things like that. We'll actually be adding a blog post in later. I'm just going to copy a couple files that I have already formatted in this format, and I'll put them in there for our blog posts. And we have the output. This is actually what's being built by the publish package, and it's actually going to be what we're going to be looking at on the website. So it includes things like the index.html, the feed, if you wanted to have one, the styles, the CSS, things like that. Next, we have the resources. This is empty right now, but this is where you'd put your custom CSS files or images or things like that. Lastly, we have the sources, which is where we actually write the code. And this is going to have a main.swift file. This is where we're going to write all of our code. And this is where we're creating our website object. So now let's dig a little bit more into what's in this main.swift file. So as you can see, we have what is essentially our website name, Swift blog website. Remember, that's what the folder was that we created. And we actually have this new object, which is of type website. And inside of this object, we have something called a section ID. This is going to be all the different pages that we have on our website. In this case, we only want one page, really. It's just going to be a blog. So we only have posts right here. Item metadata, I don't fully understand quite yet, but I believe this is data that you can pass around to the different pages and include with the different items such as posts and things like that. So you can have it be consistent across the website. Over here, we have a couple of variables that we actually need to update right now. The URL, which is where your site is actually going to be living, the actual name of your website. So we would actually want to have some spaces in here, and then a description of your website. So if your website were to show up on Google, what would you want it to show? So let's go ahead and update some of these things right now. All right, so now that we have some of the information updated, let's go ahead and take a look at this last line. This is where all the magic actually happens. So what we're doing is we're creating an instance of our website. We're running this publish function, and we're passing in a theme. Now, luckily enough, John Sundell has provided us with a foundation theme, which if we jump in, you can actually see that there's a lot of stuff that actually goes into this. And we're going to break this down right now. If we go back to our website, you'll notice that it's nicely styled and it's actually very similar to his website. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to keep his CSS and we're going to copy it into our project and make a modifiable file in our project that you can go ahead and update at a later time if you would like to change colors, fonts, and things like that. But for the most part, what we're going to do is we're going to keep his CSS file and include it into our project, but just make sure that it's a brand new one so we can modify it whenever we want. So let's go ahead and grab his CSS file real quick. So let's open the publish package down here, then go down to resources, and in this folder called foundation theme, you'll actually see this styles.css. I'm going to copy everything that's in here, all the content excluding the comments, and I'm going to create a new file in my resources. All right, so as you can see here, I created a folder called my theme in my resources, and I put a new file called styles.css. What we want to make sure that we do is whenever you create a new file inside of this project, it's going to automatically be a Swift file. Make sure that you change the extension to .css or whatever relevant extension is needed. So while we're still in this CSS file, there are two things that I want to point out, two different classes, because we're going to actually be using them. The first is wrapper. As you can see, there's some setup right here that's going to make anything that's inside of a wrapper look a specific way. We'll be using that later. And then another one that we're going to be using in a little bit is going to be this item list class. So whenever we have an item list and it's inside of a list item, it's going to look this type of way. So you can go back and modify these things, but I just wanted you to be aware of them when we actually start adding them to our HTML. Our next step is to go into the foundation theme that John Sundell has set up for us. So you could either go over to main.swift and command click on foundation, or you can actually find it under sources, publish, and then API. And it'll be the file called theme plus foundation. And let's scroll all the way to the top. So I'm going to go over a rough overview of how some of these things work. And then what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and implement the bare bones of what we actually need to implement our website. So this part is going to be very important. where I go through and explain how things are working. And then when we're actually coding stuff up, we're going to go pretty quickly. So let's go ahead and jump into what's going on right here. So this is our theme, and as you can see, it's an extension that's provided by John Sundell. It's called Foundation. That's why we did .foundation, and all it's doing is creating this theme. Now, a theme has two different arguments that you need to pass in to create it. So it has the HTML factory and then the resource paths. The HTML factory is this object down here, and this is actually how the website or this publish framework actually decides how a website is supposed to look in these different use cases. So if we go ahead and command click into HTML factory, jump to its definition, we'll actually see that it's a protocol and that there's certain things that we need to do in order to implement a HTML factory. The make index HTML is pretty much the main web page. So whenever you type in, your website.com or something like kiloloco.com and you go to the main web page, this is the function that's going to be handling how that website looks. So this will handle our main site. A section is each of those cases. Remember that we had the section ID, and if we go back over to the main.swift, we can see that we have a section ID and we have posts, right? So since we have a section ID called posts, this means that we're going to be able to go to a website like kiloloco.com/posts. And what gets rendered on that type of page will be handled by this function, how it decides to render and spit out HTML. The make item HTML is going to handle how the individual objects are rendered. Each of these items are rendered. So going back to our example where we're creating posts or blog posts, and if we were to go to kiloloco.com/posts, we would see all of our blog posts, right? If we were to click into a blog post, then this is the HTML that we would see, anything that's rendered in here. And each of those blog posts are considered an item. And that's why we have this make item HTML. The make page HTML is for special website pages that will not be using some type of item or are not going to be really dynamic. It's going to be more for your static websites, something like maybe a resume or an about me page. So if you want to render out a specific web page to look a specific way, then this is where that code is going to happen. For these last two, we're not really going to cover, but they have to do with tags, and essentially they're optional. So if you don't use tagging on your website, you can go ahead and return nil, and that's what we'll actually be doing. Jumping back, let's go ahead and take a look at the foundation make index HTML method, just so that we can get a better idea of what's going on. So as you can see, we're specifying a language right here. If you want to have like different support for different languages and things like that, you can add that in. We'll actually be excluding it in this tutorial. It's just a needless line and we don't need it for our bare bones app. Next, we have the head. If you're familiar with web development, you'll know that there's a head to a website which contains all the metadata, and then there's a body. And the body is where like all the content lives of how the website's actually going to be rendered. It's also worth noting that each of these objects that we're seeing right here in this dot format are creating nodes. So if we were to option click on dot head, you would actually see what it's doing or what arguments it's expecting. And you'll also see that it's planning on spitting out this node, which takes a generic object of type HTML.document context. So it's really important that you understand that we're working with nodes inside of this HTML block. The body will also take different HTML blocks. As you can see, we're creating a header. That's normally where you would actually put your navigation bar and things like that. Once again, we have this wrapper. So remember I mentioned the wrapper class that we have inside of the CSS. Well, there's actually this function that was created, and if you command click on it, you can actually see the definition, but it has this wrapper, which is simply a div, which is a way to section or group together different parts of the website. So as you can see, this is the groups. This is essentially just taking in all the different nodes, making sure that they work together inside of this div, and they're going to be working with the class as well. All right, going back up to the make index HTML, let's take a look at what's also going on in here. So as you can see inside of this wrapper, we have the header, which is just going to simply display the title with a h1 tag. We have nodes in here. This is the class, and we're passing in the text. So we're going to be using this type of description, or at least that's what Foundation is doing. There's another section called latest content, and then he also created this thing called item list. We're going to be using this as well. If you command click and then jump to the definition, you'll actually see that item list is going to create, I believe that means unordered list, and it's going to conform to the class item list. Remember that I mentioned that in the styles.css file as well. This simply takes in all the items that you pass into it. It loops over it in this for each method, and then it creates list items. So each of these list items are going to be of type, tagged with article. And as you can see, there's going to be a title with a h1 formatting, and it's also going to be a link. .a means that it's a link, and the link path is actually located there. We won't be using tags, so we won't need to worry about that, but we will have a description. So as you can see, it's going to be in the paragraph tag, and we're going to pass in the text and pass in the item description. All right, let's go back. As you can see, the item list takes the items. So in order to get those items, they're just simply doing all items, grabbing it directly from the context that's being passed in. Lastly, you can add a footer. We won't be adding one in this tutorial. All right, so with all that super long explanation, all we need to do is copy a few things so that we can use them ourselves, and then we can get coding. So the first thing that I want to copy is this wrapper function, because it's going to be useful so that we're able to actually take advantage of the same CSS that was provided by the Foundation. So go ahead and copy this, and we actually need to take the wrapper and this extension as well. Let's go ahead and paste that into our main.swift. I'll go ahead and put this above the actual last statement so that we can just make sure that everything's going to work as expected and it's defined before using it. Now that we have the wrapper in there, let's go ahead and go back and get the item list as well. All right, so after pasting the item list in the same extension that we did for the wrapper, we get this error because we don't have this tag list function. Let's go ahead and remove that since we're not going to be working with tags anyways. And now it looks like everything's working again. One last thing that I want to do before we continue is make sure that we're keeping track of the ending parentheses, because with these pyramids of doom, it gets really complicated to find out where you're actually at. All right, with those comments, at least we'll know where things are ending at. Next, what we need to do is we need to create our own HTML factory. So let's go ahead and do that. All right, so as you can see, we created my HTML factory. It's a generic object which takes in a site which must conform to website. If we go ahead and do Command R, we should get an error. And this is going to be because we haven't implemented all the different methods that are required by the HTML factory. Let's go ahead and make sure that we fix that, and it will get the auto-populated required methods in there. Like I said, we won't be using tags, so let's go ahead and nil these out. We also won't be making any special individual page. So what I'll do is I'll actually call the make index HTML function just so that whenever we get some type of weird page, if somebody tries to go to a specific page for whatever reason, it simply sends them back to the home page. Now we're left with the three remaining functions that we actually need to implement. So first I'm going to start by implementing a HTML object, which we can initialize with a simple empty string. Now that we have our HTML factory implemented, we're pretty much able to create our very own theme. So let's go ahead and create an extension on theme and make one called my theme. All right, so as you can see, we created this extension on theme. We created a static computed property called my theme, and all we're doing is creating this brand new theme with our new object that we created up here called my HTML factory. And as of right now, we don't have any resource paths. So what we actually want to do is we want to add in a resource path to our CSS file, which is over here in our resources folder under the folder My Themes. So let's go ahead and add that in now. Now that we have that added in, all we need to do is simply use My Theme. All right, so now we're pretty much ready to go. What's going to happen if we were to run right now is we would actually run into this blank website because our HTML would consist of just this empty string. There would be literally nothing on it. So to just make it so that we can actually see something, let's go ahead and start with a hello world. Let's go ahead and run our program now. After it's finished, we should be able to go back over to our website and then reload with Command R. And as you can see, we get hello world, which is perfect. So now all we need to do is start implementing the HTML in the code that Publish provides for us. So let's go back. All right, so the first thing that we're going to do in our index HTML function, which is essentially rendering out the home page, is we're going to create the head so that we can at least get the CSS going. So let's do that now. All right, so it's pretty easy to make the head, and it's going to be this easy moving forward for all the other websites. So let's go ahead and add those in right now too. All right, so now that we have the head inside of the HTML for each of our websites, we would actually be able to run this and we would be able to see that our CSS is now in effect. The way that we're going to be able to prove this is because remember that I have a dark theme for my operating system. So if I reload this, I should get a dark screen. Perfect. Let's go back and start adding in some of the content now. So remember that there's two parts to every website. There's the head, which we already finished adding, and now we need to do the body. So what I want to do is I want to create a body with essentially a header, and inside that header, we're going to have the navigation bar. So I'm going to add that in now. So as you can see, we created this body. Inside that body, we're going to have a header. Inside of that header, we're going to be using the wrapper. Remember that we added the wrapper extension up here. So it's going to be a div with the class type wrapper, and then all of our nodes that we pass into it are going to be in that group. From there, we're going to add a navigation bar. And inside that navigation bar, we want to make sure that we show the text, and we could put in a simple string right here if we wanted, but instead what we can do is we could use context, which has, once again, the site property, and a site has a name. So we'll be using that. Let's run that and see what it looks like. All right, looks like we have a success. Let's go back to our website and reload. All right, looking pretty good. So now that we have this navigation bar at the top, it looks a lot better. All we need to do is we need to update the text right here. And luckily our CSS file already has a class that can handle that for us. Inside of this nav bar, we want to add a class called site name. Now the site name is going to take our text and it's going to create it so that it looks a little bit more, sexier. All right, perfect. So let's go ahead and run the code again so that we get the updated code. And let's go back to our website and reload. And as you can see, it looks a lot better now. Next, what we need to do is we need to start working on the actual content that's going to go in this area here. So let's go back to our project. And we want to make sure that we're still inside the body, but we don't want to be inside the header anymore. So the rest of our content is actually going to be inside of a wrapper. And what we want to do is we want to get all the items that we can inside of our content. So remember, our content is up here in posts. We want to get all the items, which will be in individual folders. So inside of our post folder, you'll actually see that we have this first post. So anything that's not the index.md is going to be counted as an item in our content. So let's make sure that we go back over to our project and we create an unordered list. We add in each of the items, and then what we'll do is we'll render out the HTML for those items. All right, so as you can see, there was a lot of stuff added in here. So let's just go back through it one more time. So once again, unordered list, we're going to get all of the items by using a for each. We're going to pass in the context, which has a property called all items. Now, when we grab all items and we fetch them, we're able to decide how we want them sorted and how we want them ordered. So what we're going to do is we're going to sort them by date, and then we're going to order them descending. This will make sure that our latest article, the newest blog post that we put up, will be the one at the top so that users can see it. Now, since this is a for each, this is actually going to return a closure, which is going to pass in each of the items. Now, each of these items will have their own characteristics, just like any other for each loop that you would be working with or mapping function. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a list item for each item. Inside of these list items, they will be articles, and each article will have a header, which we're going to use the item's title. And then it's going to have a description, which we'll put in a paragraph tag. So now if we go ahead and run this, let's see what it looks like. All right, and let's jump back over to our website and reload. And as you can see, we have my first post and a description of my first post. So let's take a look at where that content is coming from. All right, so as you can see, once again, content, posts, and this is where all that content is coming from. So now what I'll do is I'll actually add in a couple of blog posts that I wrote a long time ago, and they're going to be formatted in this format so that we can actually see those as well. All right, perfect. So as you can see, I have a couple of blog posts that are from a couple of years ago, and they're all formatted in this markdown format. And as you can see, we have the date, we have the description, and then we also have any tags that you want to have associated with them. So now that I have new content in here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to run the project again and take a look. All right, looks like everything worked. Let's go back, reload the page. So as you can see, we have all my content in here, and it's starting to really take shape of how our blog post is actually going to look. Now, don't get confused the fact that this says my first post. The reason for that is because remember that our content is all ordered. So my first post actually has a date, if we take a look at it, as 2020, but any other blog is 2018. So in order to just not confuse you, I'm going to change this date to 2017. I'll run it again, update my content, go back over to the website, reload it, and now you'll actually see my first post all the way at the bottom. So that's great. It's starting to really take shape, but there's a couple of CSS updates that we really need to add so that it starts looking a lot better. The first thing that we want to do is we want to make sure that one, we're able to actually click on these links because right now we can't go anywhere. And then two, what we want to do is we want to make sure that they are formatted and looking very nicely. So let's go back over to the code. We're going to head over to our main.swift. So in order to make sure that our titles are actually selectable, we need to wrap this text in a .a tag, and that will also need to have a href, which is a reference to where that link is actually going to take them. All right, perfect. So now that we wrapped it in a .a tag and it has a href, a reference to where it takes us, and we use that by getting the items path. Let's go ahead and run that and check our website now. Let's go ahead and reload. And now, as you can see, everything's underlined. And if we go ahead and click on it, we're taken to another page. Now, keep in mind that this is an item, and we're actually looking at the accountability item, and we don't have any way of rendering out that data. So as you can see in this item, we're actually not doing anything. So all the HTML still needs to be put in there, but we do have the head tag, which is why the background is still dark. So we're going to cover that in a bit, but let's go ahead and continue with making sure that our original page looks better. So the next thing that we want to do is we want to make sure that in our unordered list that we're going to make sure we use that class item list. Now that we added this item list, which we're going to be using, everything should look a little bit better. Let's head back. Let's make sure that we go back to our original site and reload. And as you can see, everything's starting to really take shape. So with this done right here, all we need to do is we need to make sure that we go into our post and we're able to actually read the content. So let's go ahead and start adding in the item HTML now. So scrolling down to the item HTML, as you can see, the only thing that we have in here is head. So what we want to actually do is we want to once again add a nav bar, but we also want to render out the content for the item as well. Now, instead of going back and rewriting all this code for my header and having the nav bar look exactly the same, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to create another extension that's going to allow me to have our header be its very own thing so that we can just pass it in and it spits out a new node. So let's go ahead and add that extension now. All right, so as you can see, we're going to be doing an extension on nodes because each of these are a node, and we're making sure that it's only for nodes where the context is equal to html.body context. So let's go ahead and take a look at what's going on inside of our header class. Now, everything seems normal until we get down to the actual content. Now, using a class is fine. We're just using a simple string, but the problem becomes that we're using context. So as you can see, context is of type publishing context, and it's a generic type. So we need to make sure that our function that creates our header is going to be able to take in that context. So let's go ahead and add that in now. All right, perfect. So as you can see, we created a function called myHeader. It's going to be a generic function where whatever the generic type that's passed in is going to conform, or it must conform to type website. So when we pass in a context, which is going to be of type publishing context, it's going to already have an associated site with it. And that's going to obviously conform to website. And that's why we're able to make it work like this. Next, all we need to do is copy our header in and we're good to go. Perfect. So now let's go ahead and replace this header with my header. All right. Everything looks way cleaner now. So let's go ahead and run it. Make sure that our website still looks right on our main web page and then keep going. All right, we just need to go back to localhost, reload the page, and make sure that everything still looks the same. Perfect. The last thing that I want to do is I just want to make sure that whenever we click on this title, we're always taken back to the home page. All right, let's go ahead and add that in. So with our text, let's wrap that in an A tag, and then we'll be able to reference back to the home site. All right, looking good. Now that it's wrapped in an A tag, we should be able to click on our text and it should be able to take us back to our website whenever we click that in our header. Let's go back to our website, reload it. And now if you hover over it, you'll actually see that it has a pointer and it should reload the page. We're still on this index.html page, but once we add this header over to one of our posts, we'll actually be able to go back to our home page. Let's add that now. So let's go down to our item HTML and let's go ahead and add in the body. All right, now that we have our header in, let's run it. Let's make sure that we're able to see our header on our page. We reload, we see it, we click it, and we're back to our home site. Let's go ahead and start rendering out some of the content. So this is going to be actually quite simple. All we need to do is we need to create a wrapper. Inside that wrapper, we'll have an article, and that article will contain our content body, which is a different type of node that pretty much renders the item that's being passed in right here. So let's add that now. All right, so as you can see, once again, we're using our wrapper class, which makes things formatted pretty nicely. We're wrapping it in an article tag because once again, this is an article and that helps for like search engine optimization and optimizing your website or optimizing crawlers to know what is in this content. And then we're just saying we're going to create a new node from the item body, which is the HTML version of whatever our content is. So any of this, it's going to be represented as HTML. So let's go ahead, go back to our code. Let's Command R and run it. Let's head back over to the website and let's go ahead and click on any of these. And as you can see, bam, it's rendering our content, which is really cool. And we can go back to the website by simply hitting up here. All right, so the last thing that I want to show you is the URL that we're currently working with. So as you can see, it's localhost. So essentially whatever your website will be, kiloloco.com/post or whatever. So when we do this /post, this is actually a website. Remember, I was mentioning sections. So if we go over to this /posts, usually you would expect to see all the different content in here. But since we haven't rendered that HTML out, we're actually seeing this blank screen. So since we have such a simple website, we don't need to really do anything in here other than show our home page. So let's go back to the code and make sure that we're handling that use case too. So if you want your section page, the /posts or whatever other section IDs that you may have in here, whatever else that you have up here in your section ID, if you want to render those out special, and you normally would, because your homepage may not be just all your blog posts, then that's where the HTML would go right here. So since we're not going to be doing that and we're creating such a very simple website, all we're going to do is we're going to once again call this index HTML function, because we're already listing out all of our posts because our website's so simple. So let's go ahead and add that in now. All right. Perfect. So let's go ahead and run that. And let's take a look at that /posts website now. So if we go ahead and we're at /posts and we reload this website, as you can see, it pretty much looks like our home page. If we go and select our home page, it looks exactly the same. But if we were to go to /posts, it would also look like that. So now we have this fully functional blog website. We can click into it, we can view our content, and everything's working. And that's pretty much it. We were able to create a blog post, put it inside of our content, and load it all up. So now a user can go through and read it. Now, obviously CSS can be updated. You know, you can change the way that all this looks in the markdown file. You can obviously improve your home screen if you want it to. There's all kinds of things that you could do with the CSS, but that's not what we're here for. We're here to write Swift websites. Well, that's pretty much it for this tutorial. I know that it was a long one, but I hope that you learned something new, and hopefully you'll go out there and create a Swift website. If you like the video, make sure you share it with the rest of the community so more people can see it. And if you have any topics that you want me to cover, you know, whether it be iOS development or software development in general, then make sure you leave it in the comments below. Now go out there and keep coding passionately.